Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Selamat pagi, Bapak-bapak, Ibu-ibu, dan teman-teman semua di seluruh Indonesia dan juga di luar negeri. Selamat datang di pelatihan secara daring Histology Based Rapid Reproductive Analysis for Tropical Fish. Saya, Eni Buhari, akan menjadi moderator di acara ini. Selamat datang di modul kedua pelatihan secara daring ini. Kalau Bapak Ibu mungkin ingat 2 minggu yang lalu, tanggal 18 Januari dan 21 Januari, kita menerima pelatihan modul 1, di mana tim instruktur memberikan, sharing ilmunya tentang bagaimana cara mengamati dan menginterpretasi preparat jaringan gonad ikan. Pada hari ini, tanggal 1 Februari, dan juga hari Kamis, tanggal 4 Februari, tim instruktur akan memberikan pelatihan dengan fokus kepada analisis statistik data reproduksi. Tim instruktur terdiri dari 3 orang pakar di bidangnya. Yang pertama adalah Dr. Eric Franklin dari the University of Hawaii, dan yang kedua Dr. Ken Necker dari Bishop Museum, juga dari Hawaii, dan yang ketiga Dr. Ross Langston dari Windward Community College, juga dari Hawaii. Untuk bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu yang baru bergabung di hari ini, saya ingin menjelaskan sedikit aturan main ya pelatihan kita ini, house rules, bahwa yang pertama mic atau speaker dari peserta sudah dibisukan secara otomatis oleh sistem sehingga tidak mengganggu proses pelatihan. Jadi nanti pada saat sesi pertanyaan, Bapak Ibu bisa angkat tangan atau raise hand di bagian bawah frame Zoom Bapak Ibu. Nanti saya sebagai moderator akan memilih beberapa peserta untuk diberikan kesempatan bertanya secara live. Bagi mereka yang ingin bertanya dengan cara mengetik, bisa mengetik atau mengklik tombol Q&A di bagian bawah dari frame Zoom. Dalam bahasa Inggris boleh, dalam bahasa Indonesia boleh. Nanti salah satu dari tim instruktur akan menjawabnya. Selain itu, Bapak Ibu bisa juga menyampaikan pertanyaan dengan email ke alamat tanya.histology@gmail.com. Berikutnya, buat Bapak Ibu yang ingin mendengarkan pelatihan ini dalam bahasa Indonesia, kami juga menyediakan penerjemahan simultan langsung secara paralel. Di bagian bawah dari Zoom frame Bapak Ibu ada tombol globe ya, bola dunia. Di situ bisa diklik dan bisa dipilih bahasa yang dikehendaki. Mungkin itu dulu aturan. Oh, yang terakhir, untuk bisa mendapatkan gambar yang jelas dari materi pelatihan, maka di pojok kanan atas ada pilihan tombol Speakers View, sehingga Bapak Ibu bisa langsung melihat screen secara besar dari setiap pembicara yang berbicara. Mungkin itu dulu, tanpa berhenti, saya serahkan Bapak Franklin.
Of Marine Affairs and Fisheries for supporting this training. For those of you that did not participate in the first week of this training, my name is Eric Franklin. I'm an associate research professor at the University of Hawaii and serve as the technical lead for fisheries science for the supplemental technical assistance to the USAID Sea project managed by Tetra Tech, funded by the Walton Family Foundation. This training is part of the Supplemental Technical Assistance Project. During this training, we'll present you with an introduction to the histology-based analysis of tropical fisheries to provide life history information that is useful for marine conservation and fisheries management. These methods have been deployed and refined over the last 10 years in the Indo-Pacific region by the instructors. The approaches are described in detail in a standard operating procedure document that we have shared with you. The training is presented in 2 modules. Last week, during the first module, we provided an overview of the anatomy, development, and classification of fish reproductive structures. We reviewed male and female reproductive structures and shared images of fish gonad sections during instruction and provided interactive feedback to assist participants during the training and in preparation for the exam on that module. As we shift to the second module, let me briefly provide a broader perspective on why you might use these methods that we cover in the training. The methods can provide an important life history information set of parameters that is particularly useful for single species fishery stock assessments. For example, spawning stock biomass is a critical metric used to inform the status of a fish stock. In order to estimate the spawning stock biomass, you must first know the size or length at maturity for that species, for which can be estimated using methods. And you can use information to determine the total, in other words, the spawning stock biomass. Similarly, estimates of fecundity provide a detailed description of the reproductive potential for a stock by estimating an egg production at size relationship. Finally, we recommend the use of histology to determine fish gonad sex at maturity stage. But we, as well as published studies, have fashions of sex and maturity for individual fish that lead to errors in the estimates of size at maturity and spawning stock biomass for the species. Beginning today, the second module introduces the statistical analysis of reproductive data, including methods to calculate weight-length relationships, bimodal size comparisons, size at maturity, sex ratios, fecundity, and spawning periodicity. We will provide an example data set and use it to demonstrate the different analysis methods using both Excel and R software. Similar to the first module, an exam will be offered for participants to test their knowledge of the course materials. The exam will be offered online for the rest of the year and can be taken as many times as necessary to achieve a passing grade. Once the exam is passed, the participant will receive a certificate of completion issued from the University of Hawaii. Thank you again for participating in the course. We look forward to sharing the remaining materials with you and helping you learn more about tropical fish reproduction. I'll now pass you on to my colleague, Ken Longenecker, who is a good man and thorough, to begin this week's training. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Eric. Don, selamat pagi. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm very pleased to see that such a large number of individuals have come back to join us yet again. My job today is going to be to show you some statistical analyses that can be performed in Excel. A bit of a background on what what is their experience from I'm not sure to I'm an expert in Excel. Today, during the presentation, I'm going to assume that people do not understand or have not used Excel. So in other words, we're going to be looking at some very basic ways to manipulate Excel. And I hope those of you who are experts in Excel will not be offended by my simplistic approach. Rather, I want to be sure that nobody is left behind as we go through these analyses. The other thing that I would like to highlight is that the analyses we are doing today are histologically verified. So the data that we will be using for these analyses rely on you having or the user having determined the histologically verified the sex and maturity status of a fish. These are the names of those files. If you don't have them right now, don't worry about it. I do want to highlight that we recommend that people just watch the video today or watch the webinar and try to do the analyses a little bit later on. Unless you have two monitors and can switch back and forth between watching me and doing your own manipulations in Excel, we're afraid it might be a little bit too easy to fall behind. If you don't have these sheets or don't know, or when you're ready, if you don't have these spreadsheets at hand and don't know where to find them, I'd like to remind you where they're at. This is our Laulima website. You would just go to resources, and here we have several things organized for you. Eric mentioned the standard operating procedure, which we are following in this course, and that is available to you here. And here are the Excel spreadsheets that we will be using. So there's all three of those available right in the front when you click on the resources. I'd like to point out another feature while we're in here. We do now have a set of tutorials for all of the subunits that we will be talking about today. And those are available in a new Jungle Histology YouTube channel. So if you click on that link that I just showed you, you'll be taken directly to our YouTube channel. And you can see that we have very brief videos introducing you to all of the topics that I will be covering today. One more thing that is in the Excel tutorials is a PDF explaining how to do the plotting that we're going to be doing in Excel today. Unfortunately, when we wrote the SOP, we did not include instructions for plotting. So if you get a little bit behind, you can either refer to the YouTube videos, which go through the plotting procedures, or have written instructions by clicking on this link. I'd also like to remind you, and I mentioned this during our last session, that in order to succeed at these Excel analyses, you will need both the data analysis tool pack and the solver add-in. Here are the links to instructions on how to load those. Also, last time I gave a very brief PowerPoint presentation. That PowerPoint presentation is available in Laulima under the training resources, and we've organized everything and put all of the PowerPoint presentations in right now. So here was preparation for statistical analysis in Excel. The very brief presentation I gave in the first session is available. The presentation that Ross gave is available. And the presentation that you're going to be seeing today is also available in Laulima. So all those resources are there for your use if you would like to use them. So the format that I'll be following today is for each of those subsections or each of those topics, the weight-length relationship, the sex-based bimodal size distribution, size at maturity, sex ratios, length fecundity relationships, and spawning periodicity. I'll give a brief introduction in PowerPoint. We'll switch over to Excel and show you how to do the statistical analysis. Then we'll stay in Excel and I'll show you how to plot the results of these analyses. And then we'll wrap up each section with a question and answer period. Okay. The first thing I want to be sure that everybody knows how to do is add data to these Excel spreadsheets. So I'm going to be using the file called SOP data template, and I'm going to try to zoom in on that right now and show you what I mean. Okay, so we'll be looking for this spreadsheet. And if you take a look at that right now, you can see that there are no raw data in what we call the data worksheet. So I'm in this data tab right now. That means that if you click on any of these other worksheets down below, this is the weight length one, the bimodal one, there's not much in there. Or in some cases, it's waiting for you to provide it with some information. Okay. As soon as you enter those data, then you will see that a lot of these columns and cells become auto-populated. So the easiest way to get data in there is to go to the data spreadsheet, which is named raw data IDLL, and that was named after our imaginary species, Janus langstonii, that was processed in Indonesia, was what the ID stood for. So to copy these data, the simplest thing you can do is just click here on the upper left-hand corner, and that selects everything in that worksheet. Now, I have a little bit of a confession here. I'm old enough that I started using computers when you had to use keyboard commands instead of a mouse. So I'm a little bit more comfortable using those keyboard commands to move around in Excel. I'll tell you what I'm doing with those keyboard commands, but also point out what you could do if you're more comfortable using the mouse to call up some commands. So for me to copy, I just hit Control-C. And that will copy everything in this worksheet. Or you could click up here in the corner on copy, which would accomplish the same thing. Then we just go over to our data template, click in that same upper left-hand corner. I'm going to click or enter Control-V for paste, or you could use the paste command here if you're more comfortable with the mouse. Then I'm just going to go across some of these tabs down on the bottom and show you what happens. So now, when this was previously blank, we've got some information incorporated into there. We're still going to do some analyses, and these lines here are just placeholders waiting for us. Some of the sex ratio information has already been pre-populated, and statistical tests have been run. And then some of the information for fecundity is there already, just as examples. So now that I've shown you how to add data, and hopefully everybody understands what that process is, we're going to dive right into the weight-length relationship. So another confession I have right now here at the very beginning is that the weight-length relationship really doesn't depend on histology. This is simply a byproduct of all that information that we were gathering as we were processing the specimens. And if you remember back to that first presentation I gave, we measured the length of the fish, and we also weighed the fish for other purposes. But now we have this information that we can use to generate a weight-length relationship. So this doesn't depend on histology, although we can do some tests that do depend on histology, and I'll show you those towards the end of this little section. But the reason we do the weight-length relationship is because, as Eric mentioned earlier, a lot of the fishery models do depend on biomass estimates. So if you have a bunch of length measurements for fishes, you can take these weight-length relationships and come up with what we believe, or what should be, very accurate estimates of the weight of the fish just by knowing its length. Okay. So what I've shown you right here is a plot of the raw data. These are all of the weights and the lengths of those specimens in our example data set. The lengths are on the x-axis and the weights are on the y-axis. The way that we typically describe a weight-length relationship is as a power function. That is, weight equals some parameter A times the length of the fish raised to some parameter B. And when you calculate this weight-length relationship, basically this equation describes this curve. And it's this curve that we can use then to estimate the weight of a fish if we know its length. Now, curvilinear relationship isn't something that Excel likes to do. Rather, it likes to do linear regression analysis, and we'll show you what that is in just a second. I also suspect that back in the early days that people took this approach in linear regression because it was a little bit easier to do the statistics before powerful computing was available to everybody. So how do we linearize those data? We simply log transform them. And now we have the log of the length. This is log to the base 10 of the length on the x-axis, and the log to the base 10 of weight on the y-axis. And those two equations are now related to each other in this way, that linear regression basically takes the form of a line. So we have log of the weight, which is related to the weight up here, equals log of that parameter A, this parameter that we're looking for in the weight length relationship, times B, or the slope of the line, which is the same thing as the exponent in this equation, times the log of the length related right here. So I've shown you here is that same linearized data, that log transformed data. I've expanded the plot so you can see that basically this log of A is the intercept right here. And then the slope of this line is this parameter B. Okay. So see here is if this slope of the line is about slope of 3, and that's, about a slope of 3, or this exponent is going to have a value of about 3. That is that weight tends to be a cubic relationship of length. And if you think about it, that's because as a fish grows, it's not only getting longer, it's getting deeper, and it's getting wider. So it's growing in 3 dimensions. Okay, so with that simple introduction, let's go to the Excel spreadsheets and see how we do the full weight length analysis then. So we have right here in these 2 columns, we've already log transformed our lengths and weights. Excel has simply gone and looked through all the length data on the first data spread, or this first data worksheet, and log transform it. This is log to the base 10 of length, and this is log to the base 10 of weight. What we want to do now is linear regression on that. And to get there, we're going to click on the data tab here at the top, and I'll zoom in a little bit to show you what I'm talking about. We're going to click on this button at the top. And then we're going to go over here and click on data analysis. And this is that add-in that I told everybody is going to be necessary to complete these analyses. Okay. When you click on data analysis, a new window should pop up. And all you need to do is click on this button, regression, and click on OK. And it's going to ask you to input some data. So I'm going to zoom out in just a little bit. I'm going to explain to you right here what it is that we're doing. We're going to input the Y range, or the log of weight. Then we're going to input the X range, or the log of length. And then we're going to choose our output option so that it shows up on the same page we're looking at the log transformed weight and length information. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second too. So we're going to input the Y range. We'll just click here on the top button, log weight. Let me get myself out of the way here. Uh-oh, what have I done? Okay, let me try that again. So we'll click on this top button, or the top cell, and then I'm just going to hit Shift and page down, and we're going to get all of that, those log transformed weight data. Okay. Then we're going to go back and click on the input X range, which is the log of the length, and we're going to do the same thing, Shift page down, until we select everything. And then for our output range, I'm going to, as a placeholder. So I'm going to click in here and then click on this cell D1 and hit OK. And it returns basically the full linear regression analysis for us. This explains how well this curve relates to the data, the raw data that we've plotted. This says that it's a significant relationship, that these data are not randomly associated with one another. And then here is the intercept, that value which equals log of A, and this x or the variable B. Now, if you remember, I said that this is not the A parameter that we look form that. So basically we have to, I'll show you what's going on here. We'd have 10 raised to the power negative 1.855, and that equals, whoops, and that equals 0.139. So our A parameter in that weight length relationship is 0.139, and the B parameter from either the linear regression or the weight length model were equivalent, so 3.11. Again, about 3. Like I said, we expect most fish to have that exponent. So what does this curve look like, or how can you make the curve like I showed you in the introduction in Excel? To do that, we're going to go up here to insert, and I'll zoom in a little bit to show you what I'm talking about. We're going to insert. Now we're going to come over here to charts, and we're going to just choose the scatter plot. Oops, sorry, I do this all the time. Let me get rid of those data. It's plotting something that I didn't want it to plot. Bear with me, please. Okay, so I have no data selected now. I'm going to go back to insert, and I'm going to choose that same scatter plot. And now basically we've got a graph with no data in there. Normally we would select data first and then choose plot, but this one we want the raw data, so we're going to refer back to the data worksheet. So to do that, click anywhere in here. Then I'm going to right click and choose select data. And this is going to pop up. Don't worry about it right now. We're just going to go over to the data page. Get this out of the way, and we're going to just simply select the G and H, or length and weight columns. Oops, it didn't look like what I did. Let me try that again. Okay. Excel fools me sometimes. So here we have our length-weight relationship, similar to what I showed you on that first plot in the introduction. We're going to change this up a little bit, and I'm going to show you how we add various elements that make this kind of a publication quality plot. We're going to make sure that we're on chart design here, and then go over to add chart elements. And we're going to add axis titles, both a primary horizontal and a primary vertical. And we can zoom out again. Then I'm going to take some time and rename these by just selecting on them at the bottom or the x-axis. We have length in centimeters. And on the y-axis, we have weight in grams. Okay. The next thing I'd like to do is get rid of all this open space. We're wasting space in the graph. So to do that, we're going to come up here to the Format button. Let me show you what I'm looking at. We're going to click on Format, and then go all the way over here to the left, and we would like to format that horizontal value. And then sometimes a format page pops up automatically. Sometimes you have to prompt Excel to do it. In this case, I do. So we just below here click Format Selection. And a new menu pops up. We want to be sure that we've selected axis options here, or this little graph looking button. And then we look at our plot and see that basically we have no data points below 15 centimeters. So I'm going to change this value to 15, and we're going to expand our plot a little bit so it looks a little bit better. Okay. The next thing that we would like to do is add the trend line. In other words, that weight length line that describes those data. To do that, we come up here and click on this little plus button, which is called Chart Elements. Whoops. And we're given a series of choices, and we want to go to trend line. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm looking at. We want to go to trend line, click on this arrow to the right, and get more options. We come over here to the menu that pops up, and we're interested in the power function. So we're going to click on this button. What Excel has done right now is added that trend line, but it's chosen to add it in the exact same color of the original raw data point, so we can't see it. So what we would like to do is change the color of that trend line. We'll come up here and click on the fill-in line. And then we want to change the color. I'll have to zoom out a little bit to show you what I'm doing here. We'll click on this button and just I'll choose black. And basically you've got the same plot that I showed you at the very beginning with both the raw data and that weight length regression line. Okay, so this line, which estimates weight, is equivalent to A 0.139 times length raised to the power of 3.122. A couple of caveats here, and we don't have time to show you in this presentation, but sometimes if you're going through and getting peer reviewed, you're submitting this to publication, people would say, hey, it looks to me like you've got some outliers. Have you considered those? The way that you can approach that is to look for the residuals in your data, and you can basically arbitrarily choose a value and say, okay, if the residuals are greater than a certain amount, I'm going to exclude those data points. We're not worrying about that for the purposes today, but be aware that reviewers may want you to do more than we've shown you right now. The other thing that I'd like to point out is that this was a weight length relationship for all individuals on the population. One of the other things you can do is a weight length relationship for males and a weight length relationship for females. And you can test whether those two relationships differ by using analysis of covariance. And analysis of covariance is beyond the scope of what we're going to be doing today, but just a brief tutorial on how we would do a sex-specific weight length relationship. So we go to our raw data, and we're going to sort those data according to the variable histosex. So let me zoom in a little bit. We'd click on the data button, go over here to sort. Be sure that you click my data has header rows because they do, and then you have all the names of the parameters that you can sort by. And again, we've selected all data in this data set. We click on histosex and click OK. And now what you can see is that all of the females are listed first, especially the immature females come first. And as we go down through, that changes to mature females, then it turns into immature males, and then it changes into mature males. And down here were all the unknown ones. Either we lost that tag that was associated with the specimen, or we lost the stub itself, or we sampled tissue that wasn't gonad. So we didn't truly histologically know what this was. So basically, this is an analysis for histologically verified sex, either males or females. So to do the weight length relationship for females, we would just select all of these length data points that correspond to a female, both immature and mature. And I'm going to go down this far. And if you can see right here, I've stopped when it changes to males. hit Control C. Whoops, I'm sorry, we needed the weights too. So let me be sure we copy those over. So I'm going to hit the Control right arrow and then hit Control C again. Then go to our data sheet, enter, Control paste, go to the weight length page, and you can see that we've got the logs of the lengths of the females and the logs of the weights of the females entered here. And then you just do the same regression analysis to come up with the weight length relationship, a sex-specific weight length relationship. Okay. So that is all that I had on the weight length relationships for right now. So I believe we can go and take some questions.
Okay, now we are in the question session ya. Bapak Ibu silahkan angkat tangan kalau mau bertanya secara langsung. Oke, silahkan. Pak Agung Abadi. Pak Agung Abadi, silahkan Pak.
Ya, Ibu, baik. Terima kasih atas kesempatan yang diberikan. Thank you. Yang saya ingin tanyakan, beberapa spesies ikan itu pertumbuhannya ada allometric positif dan allometric negatif, di mana panjang dan berat ikannya itu ada yang panjang sekali, ada yang tidak. Kenapa setiap kali kita melakukan perhitungan tingkat kematangan gonad, hal ini berhubungan panjang dan berat. Padahal beberapa spesies itu memiliki karakteristik pertumbuhan berat dan panjang yang berbeda-beda. Terima kasih.
Okay, Ken.
Eddie, I'm sorry, I'm going to need a translation, Eddie.
Oh, I thought translator already. Okay, so the question was about this allometric. Now I forgot what he said. The weight and length relationship. Fish that sometimes, I think if I'm not mistaken, he said positive allometric and negative allometric, and how that is addressed in the histological analysis. Begitu ya Pak Agung?
Ya, Bu.
I thought the translation, the interpreter.
Yeah, I don't hear a live translation. Sorry, Annie. So I'll need you to translate for me.
Okay, great. No worries. Yeah. So it's related with the positive allometric and negative allometric in fish. So they have different kind of
They do, and basically I think the answer is that basically if you see a B value or an exponent less than 3, we say it's negatively allometric. And if you see one that's much greater than 3, we say it's positively allometric. So, and honestly, we don't deal with that sort of morphology the way that many people do. So that's about the extent of my knowledge there. Maybe Ross or Eric can add something to that, but I think we can give you you get the answer with that B parameter.
Mm-hmm.
Ross or Eric, do you have anything to add?
I do not. Sorry.
I don't, only because I've been typing, answering other questions. Could you repeat the question for me?
How the weight length relationships relates to the allometry of fishes, and he was particularly curious about negative allometric relationships and positive allometric relationships. And my answer was that basically my familiarity with that is very limited, but it tends to be if you see a value significantly less than 3, then you've got negative allometry, and if you've got it significantly greater than 3, then you've got positive allometry.
I would agree with that. That's when you said that, that's exactly what came to mind for me. So I agree with that interpretation.
Gimana Pak Agung? Apa pertanyaannya sudah dijawab atau butuh penjelasan lebih lanjut? Pak Agung?
Jadi maksudnya adalah ketika kita menghubungkan parameter berat dan panjang terhadap suatu spesies, misalnya sidat atau belut, kan allometricnya positif atau panjang sekali dia. Tumbuhnya memanjang, tidak melebar. Jadi korelasinya itu bagaimana? Maksud saya korelasinya hubungan antara berat dan panjang terhadap tingkat kematangan gonad. Padahal ada beberapa spesies yang allometric positif atau allometric negatif.
Okay, so I missed the point of maturity. So he was asking that some species like Anguilla, for example, eel, have a very elongated form. So the allometry is, I forgot which one, positive or negative, more longer than wider, right? And how that weight and length relationship for that particular character affect the maturity of that species.
I don't know how that would affect the maturity of the species. It might, in fact, be the opposite, that the maturity of the species affects the allometric relationship, in that as the fish gets longer and especially becomes mature, you might expect a greater or a more positive allometric relationship. And I believe the way that you could examine for that is, instead of, if the participant remembers that I went through and selected all females, you could instead select all immature females and compare the length-weight relationship for immature females to the length-weight relationship of mature females. So I think that's how you could get at that answer of, does the allometry change with the stage in the life? And I'm not sure if I quite answered the participant's question exactly, but if I'm understanding what he was getting at, we might be kind of approaching some of the information he might be after. So in other words, because you've taken the time to histologically identify what the maturity stage is, you can then break those weight length relationships down into smaller and smaller units, or and in this case, it would be mature and immature.
Jadi jelas ya Pak Agung ya. Jadi nanti di analisisnya itu dikelompokkan, ada yang mature female, immature, betina yang sudah dewasa dan betina yang belum dewasa. Nah dari situ bisa dilihat hubungan length relationship-nya ke tingkat allometrianya Pak.
Terima kasih Bu.
Oke, sama-sama.
Thank you Master.
Ya.
Thank you.
Berikutnya Ibu atau Bapak Filza Kintan, silahkan Filza Kintan.
Yes, ma'am.
Silakan.
Thank you for the opportunity. I want to ask, when we make the weight-length relationship and we want to make the trend line in the graph, so why do we choose power? Because there is another option like exponential and linear, but we choose power. Can I ask why? Thank you.
Yes, so if I'm going to try to go back and let's see. Let me try to add a trend line again. Oh, I'm not showing my, hold on. So the trend lines that are available, quite honestly, I have never used the exponential. We may be able to do something with the exponential as well. The power function, let's see what we end up with exponential. And then let me see if we can have it display the equation on the chart. I honestly do not know the answers to that, and I apologize. What I can say is that I would always do these analyses in a different program, and I apologize for that. You'll see me struggling with Excel sometimes. But if you remember from the weight length relationship, these are the parameters that we were after, that we've solved for linearly. And I knew, based on working with Excel that power function gave us the correct answer. I don't know what I could tell you any more than that. And I'm sorry to Eric is always our statistical genius here. Eric, do you have anything you can add to that? Why the exponential?
Well, go ahead.
Why the exponential function in Excel, which was a very good question, because there were several options when we chose the trend lines for this, from polynomial to exponential to power. Exponential didn't work, although the form of that exponential function was very similar to this, but it didn't give the proper results, whereas a power function did.
Yeah, the power function just describes the structure of our weight length model. So basically it's taking the parameters that we're inputting and fitting the data to that particular model. So that's the underlying model matches basically what the mathematical model is that we're trying to describe. Is that enough?
I think so. It's one of the,
Okay.
I was not able to satisfactorily answer the participant because I wasn't sure why.
Okay. So bagaimana Bu Filza?
Okay.
Oke, terima kasih. Selanjutnya Pak Ngurah Wiatnyana. Silakan Pak. Pak Ngurah.
Ya, terima kasih banyak. Bertanya. Halo?
Iya, silakan Pak.
Saya bertanya, tadi kan untuk mengukur hubungan panjang berat, itu berapa jumlah sampel masing-masing ikan ini untuk diukur? Apakah sama untuk ikan ukuran kecil dan sampai besar? Berapa untuk agar secara statistik itu valid jumlah ikan yang diukur untuk panjang berat ini? Saya kira itu aja pertanyaan saya.
Okay, so the question is, what is the optimum number of sample that need to be measured to have a good statistically significant weight length relationship analysis?
Honestly, that depends on how much your data are scattered. So you're going to see, for instance, that we do present you with an exam later on, and some of those questions for weight length relationship are as small as 15 individuals. So if you had, and we built those data sets. So if you spread those 15 individuals over a series of size classes, you could get a very good weight length relationship. However, if you collected a bunch of fish that had pretty much the same or a very small size range, you're not going to get a very convincing weight length relationship. So my answer would be to sample over a large size range and then see how well your the length weight relationship describes your raw data. And again, you can see that through the R-square value. A, we look for significance. If the test results are less than 0.05, we say, yes, they're significant. But B, we want to be sure that you have a nice adjusted R-square value. Okay, so basically that shows you how well that model that you came up describes your raw data. So again, I guess it's, I realize this is not a very satisfactory answer, and I apologize for it, but basically the answer depends on what your data look like and what your collection looks like.
Can I chime in too?
Of course.
Yeah, I think, there's a few things to consider. One is the range of lengths that you have. So let's say you have a very high sample size, but it's all concentrated in just a section of the potential size range of that fish. That's still not enough. So you not only want to make sure that you have a high enough sample size that you're trying to capture what the true nature of that model is and encompass some of the variability Ken's talking about, but also to encompass the size range across which you can estimate lengths for both small and big fishes. And what we find generally is, at least in my own work, and Ken and Ross, I think when we hit about 50 specimens and higher is when we start to have more well-behaved curves. Things lower than that, and again, that's if they're distributed across the range of the fishes. Things lower than that, you can have some problems. And so it really also depends on, as Ken said, the noise in your data, the kind of precision you're looking for in your overall outputs. But typically weight length models are going to have a very high R-square value, 95 and 0.95 and above. So that's going to be kind of the goal that you're looking for.
And I think I would add to that there's some papers out there, Froese et al., I believe it is 2011, and they give an editorial view on how you should do length-weight relationships. And I believe that those authors said that if you do see the R-square value less than 95%, you should expect that there's something wrong. Either you've got some serious outliers in your data, or you haven't collected enough. And thank you, Eric, for reminding me of that.
Oke, bagaimana Pak Ngurah? Pak Ngurah, bagaimana?
Ya, ada satu lagi, boleh ada satu lagi pertanyaan? Tambahkan tadi ini gini kan, di tropical ini kan ada,
silakan Pak.
Dalam pengumpulan data, tadi kan panjang berat ada kaitannya dengan kematangan gonad. Nah, pertanyaan saya, apakah kita perlu dalam pengumpulan data ini sepanjang tahun atau pada musim berbeda di dalam satu tahun ini? Apakah hanya misalnya bulan Juni aja atau kita harus beberapa bulan agar mendapatkan korelasi nanti kaitannya dengan panjang berat dengan kematangan gonad tadi, tingkat kematangan gonad tadi?
So the follow-up question to that is the timing for the sampling. Does it have to have the samples collected every month of the year, or is it only like particular month of the year, like particular season, to get a good capture of this weight length relationship significance?
That's a very good question, and it's something that we haven't truly examined before. I know that a lot of times if you read in ichthyological papers, people will look at condition by season and sometimes see that fish are fatter at some times a year than the other. So you might see some variability that way. And that's another way that you could approach the weight length relationship information to see, does this vary by season? In our approach, and I apologize for this, but mostly what we're after is histological verification of the sex and maturity status on the individuals, and then we could go on and do these other analyses because we have very high confidence in how we've identified these organisms. So we haven't looked at things like seasonality in weight length relationships. Oftentimes we're trying to collect over the full year to get a good sample size that way, and then the fine tuning of the weight length relationships isn't our emphasis. But I can see, based on condition factor that I've seen reported elsewhere, that you might expect to see slightly different relationships sometimes.
Okay. Terima kasih Pak Ngurah.
I think if I could add, I would just say that to the participant, the person that asked the question, that if they do weight length relationships over a limited time of the year or a whole year, that basically they would have to explain in their materials and methods that this is the data set that they were working with, so that the readers or reviewers then could understand the limitations, if there are any, in what they had done.
Okay, great, thank you. Terima kasih Pak Ngurah. Pertanyaan terakhir Pak Prawira Atmajarintar. Silahkan Pak Prawira. Pak Prawira Atmajarintar.
Yes. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Thank you. I hope my voice reaches you well, since I likely have problem with my connection here. About the outlier, sometimes we know that it might be our mistake when inputting in our data set, but sometimes the data is really there. The strange data that we call outlier, should we keep them or we delete them? What's the consideration about that? And once more, talking about analysis of covariance is very interesting. If we still have time in this training, it will be nice if you can share how to do that to us. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to answer the second one first. I am not aware of any way in Excel that we can do analysis of covariance. So I apologize for that. Basically, what I would point you to is some statistical textbooks that could explain how to do it. I don't know. I use a different program for the analysis of covariance called Minitab, for instance, and that's the only way that I know how to accomplish that analysis. What I can tell you is that to do the analysis of covariance, you would also do that on the log transform data. So in other words, you have a linear data set that you're comparing to one another is how you can do it. But I apologize that analysis of covariance is beyond the scope of this. For outliers, we have taken a series of different approaches, and let me see if I can. Let me see if I can. Sorry. Let me see if I can show how you might be able to approach this. And I'm just going to data analysis again to regression. We're going to overwrite our data, but it says show residuals down here. There's a button that you can click to show the residuals. And saying we're going to overwrite the data and tell them, okay, that's fine. And you can see that the residuals tend to be less than 0.1 all over the place. And I'm just throwing out basically an arbitrary number right now. You could look at those data plots and figure out which one this was. For instance, it was the furthest one out there, and say, okay, if it's greater than, if it's somewhere around there, then it's a residual. There are unfortunately no really hard and fast rules about what you call a residual and what you don't call a residual. I think in the past we've used numbers like 0.1. If we see a residual of 0.1, we're going to throw it out. We've also used smaller numbers in the past, okay, just to try to clean up the data set. I think the big thing is that, as we had mentioned earlier, as Eric reminded me, that if you go through and do your analysis and see an adjusted R-squared value much less than 0.95, you've probably got some residuals in there, and then I would just start throwing out the data points that have the largest residual values, is the best advice that I could give right there.
Okay. Bagaimana Pak Prawira?
Makasih Bu, it's crystal clear.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pak. Okay, now back to the bimodal size distribution. Ken.
Okay, should I take off? Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you all for sticking with me for that one. Thank you for the very good questions. I hope I answered at least some of them adequately, and I apologize to those that I could not satisfactorily answer. We can try to follow up with those later on if you would like to. What I'd like to talk about right now is whether there's a sex-based bimodal size distribution in the population that you've analyzed. And again, sex-based means that we are looking at the histologically determined sex in order to do this, this analysis. Here, I've simply plotted out length frequency plots for males and females. So for 16 centimeter fish, we had about 13 females and we had about 5 males, okay? Whereas up here at about 32, we had, let's say, 28 males, I apologize, and no males. And this just tells us how many individuals of each length there were in the population that we analyzed. What we would like to do is test to see if the means are significantly different. And here, I hope you can see this. I've just drawn a line here, the mean for the females and the mean for the males. And we're just going to do a test right now to determine whether those are significantly different. Now, why would we do that? the simple answer is that back in the old days, a significant size-based, sex-based size distribution, bimodal size distribution, suggested that maybe your species that you've analyzed changed sex. And it would make people take a closer look. In fact, at one point in time, people would kind of accept that as pretty good evidence that you had sex change going on. That's not accepted right now because there's a lot of different reasons why you can have a sex-based bimodal size distribution other than sex change. But again, the concept was, you can see here that in the smaller size classes, we've got mostly females in this case. And in the larger size classes, we've got mostly males. And this is what you would expect if the species first matured as females and then sometime as it grows during its life, changes sex into a males. The smaller ones would be females, the larger ones would be males, okay? Again, this is not accepted as diagnostic of sex change anymore, but if you do see this, it might suggest that, hey, maybe I should take a closer look at the slides to be sure that I'm not seeing any ovotestes in there. Okay. So I'm gonna also come back a little bit later on and then talk about what these sex-based bimodal size distributions can mean in terms of sex ratios. So please keep this plot in mind for a little bit later on. So how do we test for this? I'm going to take us back to our Excel spreadsheet. Let me get my head out of the way. And we're going to go down to the tab for the worksheet called bimodal. We're going to click on that. And what you're going to see right away is, unfortunately, this is one of those worksheets that's going to take a little bit of extra effort on your part to determine whether there's a bimodal size, sex-based bimodal size distribution. We're going to go back to our data worksheet. We're going to simply check to the bimodal sheet and just hit Control V. Oh no, hold on. Didn't want to do that. I apologize. Let me try this again. Okay, I'm holding down the control button. I need to stop doing this. Okay, I'm holding down the control button and clicking on G or length, and I'm holding down the control button and clicking on the J column or histosex. Trying that again. Holding down the control button, clicked on G and clicked on histosex. Hitting Control C to copy. Apologize for my difficulties there. Going back to the bimodal sheet, clicking on that top button and hitting Control V. And now we've got our length data and our histosex data in these columns. These are just raw data now. What we like to do is sort these. So making sure that both columns are selected. We're already on the data tab, which is good because we want to go to this sort button. Okay. Again, I'll zoom in a little bit and show you what we're doing. Click on sort, and we're going to have a series of choices that we can do. Make sure my data has headers is selected because we do have headers at each of those columns. And we can either sort by length or histosex. We want to sort by the histologically determined sex. So now we can see, just like I did when I was showing the example for sex-based weight-length relationships, everything is sorted into females first, the immatures and the matures, then the males, the immatures and the matures, and then all those unknowns are going to be down at the bottom. Now, the test that we're going to use, and we have to use data analysis again, the test that we want to do is a t-test. So let me zoom in here for data analysis. We'll click on our possibilities. And at the bottom, we can see that we have 3 options for t-tests, and we need to do an analysis first to determine which one is appropriate for us. We're not going to use paired two-sample t-tests for means because that's assuming that you've taken 2 measurements on basically the same individual. So we have 2 sample t-tests, and we have to determine whether we're using the one assuming equal variances or the one assuming unequal variances. Well, how do we check for that? We're going to do an F-test for two sample variances. So click on that, hit OK, and we're going to come up with the same sort of screen you saw for the regression. We'll have to input our variables. And in this case, we're going to input the lengths of all the females. For this cell, we're going to put in the lengths for all the males. And then we're going to have our output go on the same worksheet so that we're not having to jump all around all over the place. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit and show you how we select these. Click on that top button, then select all the lengths for females. I'm just holding down Shift and then using page down so that I can select all the females. I'm going to go down to the next cell and choose the length for all the males, holding Shift and Control down. Okay. And then I want the output to go here on the same page, and we've left the placeholder up here on the top. I'm going to choose cell D1 for our output. And here's the results of our F-test. It's telling us that the mean for the variable 1, which was the females, was 23.5. The mean length for the males, which was variable 2, was 28.6. This shows us the variance. But what we're really interested in is whether the variance between those two samples were significantly different. And we can determine that with this p-value down here. If the p-value is less than 0.05, we say, yes, the variances were significantly different, and then we would select the t-test assuming unequal variances. If this is greater than 0.05, we say, no, we cannot tell the difference between those two variances, and we would select the t-test for equal variances. Well, this value is 8.72 times 10 to the negative 5, or 0.0000872, which is much less than 0.05. So we're going to use the t-test assuming unequal variances. So I'm going to take you back here to data analysis. We're going to choose the t-test assuming unequal variances. Let me zoom in here a second to show you what we're clicking on. Right here, t-test, two sample, assuming unequal variances. Okay, and we're going to get the same sort of cells again. We need to input variable range 1. We're going to select the exact same cells that we selected for the F-test. Variable range 2, the exact same cells, the lengths for all the males for that F-test, and then have our output go up at the top of the page. So variable range 1, we're clicked on already. I'm going to select all those lengths, holding down Shift and using page down to get through all the females. Selecting the next variable, holding down Shift and using page down to select all those variables. But we don't want the unknowns in there, remember. And then for our output, we're going to click on output range, click on that cell, and go up here to the top and have it appear right next to the F-test. So these are the results we're after to determine whether we have a significant sex-based bimodal size distribution. The exact same information here. Variable 1 for the females is 23.5. Its variance was 16.57. Variable 2, the mean was 28.6. These are the males. Variance was 26.22. Okay. We're hypothesizing that there was no difference or a difference of 0 between those two means. And to see whether that was significantly different or not, we come down to P for a two-tailed t-test. If this value is less than 0.05, we say, yes, there was a significant difference in the mean lengths of males and females. If it's greater than 0.05, we say there was no significant difference in the lengths between the females and the males. In this case, we've got 1.59 times 10 to the negative 33. So this is much less than 0.05. So in this case, we're saying that, yes, we do have a significant sex-based bimodal size distribution. That is, the females the mean length of females is significantly smaller than the lengths for the males. Okay. Now, a lot of times we're going to go through and do plots of what we're doing here. In this case, we're not going to do a plot because the sex-based bimodal size distribution basically doesn't mean much in terms of the histological analysis that we're doing. It may suggest that we have sex change, but again, remember that it's not diagnostic of sex change. You don't have to have a significant bimodal size, sex-based bimodal size distribution to see sex change. Likewise, if you see a significant sex-based bimodal size distribution, it doesn't mean you have sex change. Rather, it's suggesting that you may have sex change. So we're not going to bother doing any plots because basically a lot of journals that are out there would not be interested in seeing those plots for the purposes of what we're talking about here. So that is all that we have to say about sex-based bimodal size distribution at this time. And Annie, we can go back and take any questions if there are some.
Oke, silakan mulai yang mau bertanya. Saya panggil sekarang Pak Denny Suhernawan. Silakan Pak Denny Suhernawan.
Thank you for the time giving to me. Do you hear me? Excuse me?
Yes.
Yes, very well.
Okay, I'm Denny from Udayana University. I would like to ask, I have an experience. I got a small size in length of a fish, but the fish already mature histologically. And then should I put the data in the statistical analysis? It seems that the data is unlikely because the size is abnormal. It means the small size, but already mature. Should I put the data in the statistical analysis? Thank you.
I would run through the statistical analysis just to see what the results are. Again, realizing the limitations of what I've just presented, okay? The sex-based bimodal size distribution is only suggestive of sex change, but does not mean sex change and is not diagnostic of sex change. So oftentimes we put it in basically for more of a feature of interest, letting the reader know that we considered it and understand what the implications and limitations of a sex-based bimodal size distribution is. So I think it allows your reader to know that you were being thorough in your analysis. So I would do the analysis for the sake of thoroughness.
Thank you. Because
go ahead.
Yeah, because sometimes this unusual data maybe only one individual, only two, so we can remove from the data, I guess. It is better to remove it from the data so we don't put the data in the statistical, because maybe only one or two individual from the samples total. Yeah.
So I apologize, and maybe I didn't make it clear in this case. We are considering for this analysis all females, not just mature females, and all males, not just mature males. So you still may see that there's a difference, even though you have small mature individuals.
I see. Okay.
Eric?
Okay, thank you for the answer.
Yeah, I'd second Ken's response, and in your case, I would include the observation of the small mature fish, and realize that as we move on in this course, we'll cover things like size to maturity. And we use what's called an L50, which is basically a logistic regression. So it's a function that fits across your data. But realize that L50 will give you a length at which 50% of that size of those fishes are mature. But that sort of creates this S curve. And the end of that S curve that starts with when fish first become mature can actually be quite a bit smaller than L50. So what that model is telling us is that it's biologically possible for you to observe fishes that are quite small compared to what you're saying the size of maturity is within your sample. It's just not going to be a very common occurrence. But I would encourage you to include those sort of data in your analyses.
Okay, thank you.
Sudah jelas Pak Denny?
Yes, thank you Bu. Thank you.
Oke, terima
Very
kasih.
clear.
Selanjutnya Ibu Husna. Silakan Ibu Husna.
Yes, thank you. I would like to know.
So that's a good question, and I apologize, but we are skipping over a lot of basic statistics here and assumptions of models. So it's beyond the scope of what we're doing here. Your question is a very good one. Yes, those should be tested for. We have not tested for it in this example. Okay, more we're interested in showing how the actual analyses and the results can be obtained. But you're absolutely correct that those things should be tested for before doing the tests.
Okay, thank you.
Terima kasih Ibu Husna. So I think now we can continue for the size at maturity session.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is size at maturity, and Eric just gave us a nice little segue in there. There's a lot of ways that you can measure size at maturity, or a lot of parameters that are out there. One thing that you'll see reported sometimes is minimum size at maturity. That means that people will report the smallest individual length of a mature fish. Okay. And like Eric was suggesting, basically fish individuals can mature at much smaller sizes than the rest of the population. What we are after is this parameter called L50. Okay. And this is a parameter that is often imprecisely or incorrectly defined in the literature. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what this is. Usually when people say L50, no matter how they define it, what they mean is it's the length comprising 50% mature individuals. Okay. As an example, let's say that we find the L50 is 25.1 centimeters for females of genus Langstonii, and I can't remember what our data set says right now. What that means is that if you take all females that are 25.1 centimeters long, the model would predict that 50% of them are going to be mature and 50% of them are going to be immature. If you look at individuals smaller than 25.1 centimeters, the model is going to predict that fewer of those individuals are going to be mature. And if you look at individuals larger than 25.1 centimeters, the model is going to predict that more of those individuals are going to be mature. Okay, so we're after this length comprising 50% mature individuals, and we accept that as our size at maturity. Some of the ways that you'll see L50 defined in the literature is the length at which 50% of individuals are mature. That's imprecise because it leaves things open to interpretation. We believe that most of the time people mean this, it's the length comprising 50% mature individuals, but it could be interpreted as the length at which 50% of the individuals in the population are mature. And I have occasionally seen L50 defined exactly that way, as the length at which 50% of the individuals in the population are mature. And that is not equivalent to what we're doing here. If you think about fish and their mortality or survivorship curves, you oftentimes have way more small fish likely to be immature than you do have large fish, the ones that are likely to be mature. So if you're trying to come up at the point in the population, at the length of the population, where 50% of the individuals are mature, you're likely to come up with a value, if you're following the definition that is given, that is much larger than L50. Okay? So please always remember that L50 means the length comprising 50% mature individuals when we're using that term. So what do our size at maturity data look like? Here we have length, and this is a size at maturity plot for females using our example data set. So over on the y-axis, we have proportion mature. So just like Eric was saying earlier when he answered a question, here's a size class. Here we've used 2 centimeter bins. So the fish between 16 and 18 centimeters, average size of the fish that we had was 17 centimeters, and none of them were mature. Okay, so we put 0. When we look at the 18 to 20 centimeter bin, it came out, the average size was somewhere around 18.8 or 18.9. And it looks like 0.1, the proportion of 0.1 was mature, or 10% of the individuals were mature. And this goes back to Eric's earlier statement that you can have mature individuals at very small sizes, okay, and much smaller sizes than what most of the population is doing. And it's actually these things that really help us to create the size at maturity plots. So we're hoping to see results such as this, where you've got variation with length. What I'd like you to see is that somewhere up around here, about 50% or 0.5, if you look down, it's about 23 right now, might suggest that we've got a size at maturity of about 23 centimeters. But we want to model that. And we model that using this logistic equation that Eric had mentioned earlier. Okay, this basically means the proportion mature at any given length equals this formula, where we use the length of the individual or the length of the size class, this variable L50 that I was talking about earlier, or the parameter L50. We also use L95 to calculate this, which is the length comprising 95% mature individuals, or somewhere up around here. When we model this, we come up with a curve that looks exactly like Eric was suggesting, kind of an S-shaped curve. And I'm going to show you graphically what this is telling us. We'll go to Excel and solve it mathematically in just a little while. So I'm going to draw a reference line across here. This is 0.5. Okay, it represents 50% maturity on the y-axis. If we go over to the point at which our model and that reference line intersect and draw a line straight down, it should point to size at maturity for this population that we've examined. And that's somewhere in there around 23.8 something, looks like the value. Okay. Well, let's go to the Excel spreadsheets and see how we can calculate size at maturity. I'm going to move my head out of the way again. And I'm going to point out that when we look at those tabs at the bottom, we've got a worksheet for size at maturity, or SAM is what that stands for, or size at maturity is what SAM stands for. We've got a tab or a worksheet for females. We've got a separate one for males. Okay, so the only thing we're going to be looking at in this first example is the size at maturity for females. Because we've done histological verification of the sex and the maturity status of all the individuals that we've examined, we can create a size at maturity plot for both males and females and be very confident that our results are correct. And again, I'm going to take you back before I go on to one of the original statements that I made in the introduction to specimen processing on the first day. And Eric mentioned it again, that it is this histology-based analysis that we believe is most accurate. We've compared the results of histology-based analysis to our results for visual analysis and found out that visual analysis, we were wrong somewhere between 40 to 50% of the time. Or in other words, we visually judged 40 to 50% of our specimens incorrectly. And we found that time after time after time when working on multiple species throughout the Indo-Pacific. And it's not just us. Other researchers have published similar results. It's very difficult to do visual analysis and have a lot of confidence in those results. We are pretty confident in the results for histological analysis. Okay, so let's go to that.
Can I chime in just quickly?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, just one thing for folks that are watching that have experience with visual observations. You're probably thinking, well, I've done this in the past, and there are things that I see that when you've got, say, mature females have rye, that those are females, or even male structures when they're larger fishes. What we've found is where the problem starts to become more apparent is in these sizes where the maturity transition happens, or in immature sizes. Then it's very difficult to definitively say it's a male or a female. And those are the size classes that start to introduce error into the models. And those are the ones that we really think can only accurately be identified through histological approaches.
That's a good point, Eric. I should have pointed out that probably where we see the majority of the errors in that transition zone, which is exactly what we're looking for. And we've seen that it's not in every case, but with that error that we've identified, we tend to overestimate the size of maturity for males, and we tend to underestimate the size of maturity for females. So there does seem to be kind of this systemic bias, not in all cases, but oftentimes. Okay, so how do we solve for size at maturity? You can see that Excel is waiting for something to come in here, and what it is the minimum size that you're going to be dealing with. Okay. We've set this up already to deal with 2 centimeter size classes. That is, once I enter a value here, this cell is going to add 1.9 to that, so we get anywhere from the minimum size to 1.9 centimeters greater. As we go down this column, I've added 2 centimeters, or 2 to each of the above cells, and here I've added 2 to the above cells. So basically our size classes are increasing by 2 centimeter increments all the way down through here. Well, how do we find what the minimum size is? The easiest way is to let Excel do that for us. I'm going to go back to our data sheet. We're going to click on the data. We're going to slide all the way over here to a blank cell. And in here, I'm going to enter the formula. We're going to look for the minimum value, and that equals M equals sign, M-I-N, open parenthesis, and then just go back to the length column and click on it and hit enter, and it returns this value 16. 16 centimeters was the smallest individual that we had in our collection, and we let Excel find that for us rather than sorting or hunting down through there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the size at maturity for females. I'm going to enter 16 right here in the top left cell, and we can see that Excel begins to build those size classes for us. So 16 to 17.9, 18 to 19.9, and so on all the way down through in 2 centimeter increments. Then Excel did a bunch of other work for us. Okay, it's gone through here and looked at all of those size data in that spreadsheet for, let me zoom over here. It says, was it for a female? This is the question that's being asked here, either immature or mature. And if it does, it basically takes all those individuals that were females and gives us the average size of them within that size class. Okay. This is, and it basically does the same size, that same question up here. Was it a female? Was, we count it. So we have 26 female in the 16 to 17.9 size class, 38 females altogether in 18 to 19. Different question. I'll zoom in here. It says, was that female mature? So this MAT is looking for histosex of FMAT, or the mature females. Okay. In this case, the answer was no, none of those were mature. Next column down, 3 of those individuals mature, and you can see as we go up here, those numbers tend to increase. This next column looks at the proportion of mature females. So like I showed you on that introductory graph, 0% of the individuals at 17 centimeters or thereabout were mature. About 0.08%, I said 10 when I was looking at that graph, at about 18.8 centimeters were mature. Okay. And so on and so forth all the way down. This next column is the model that we're after. And if you remember what I showed you earlier, this does have some similarity to that model that I put in the introduction. C2 here refers to the average size or the length of the individuals. This K1 refers to L50. And this is the K1 cell, and you can see that that's blank right now. Here K1 shows up again. That was the L50 value that showed up twice in that logistic regression equation. And here's K2 looking for L95, which is also blank. Well, what's going on? Why isn't anything showing up here? It's because it's waiting for these cells to be filled out. And we're going to give it a little help just to start out. So we're just going to estimate what L50 is. And if you remember when I was looking at that earlier graph, I was estimating what L50 might be, and that's a good enough estimate to start off with. So here we'll look at our data set. We can see that at 23.14 centimeters, about 49%, or exactly 49% of those individuals, or females, were mature. So I'm just going to put 23.1. That's close enough. Hit enter, and all of a sudden we've got a predicted proportion of mature females right here. Okay. It also wants L95, and watch what happens in these cells as I change it. L95, we've got, here's almost 90%, here's 1% or 100%. So somewhere in between these two values of about 29 and 30.5, let's say, somewhere in between there is probably L95. So I'm going to enter 29.7. And again, this is not crucial right now, but you can see that these values changed. Okay. This next column is this error squared. So it's basically the predicted value minus the observed value squared. All the way down for all of those values, and over here in this column, or in this cell, we've got the sum of squares, which is simply all of these squared error values added together. What we're going to ask Excel to do is to solve for L50 and L95 such that this value is minimized. And to do that, we're going to need that tool called Solver. That was the other add-in that was going to be necessary to complete these data analyses. And I'm going to zoom in on Solver here, show you what pops up. Drag this over if I can. A little bit more. We're going to set our objective is for the value of this sum of squares to be minimized. So we'll click on this cell for set objectives, click on K3, which is the value for sum of squares. We've asked Solver to minimize it, and we want to minimize it by having it change these values of L50 and L95, or the K1 and K2 cells. Okay. I'll zoom out a little bit and click the button, and you can see what happens then. Down here at the bottom is simply a button that says Solve. We click on that. It says, okay, I found a solution. I've returned it. Do you want me to keep it? We'll click OK. So we'll accept these results of 23.8 and as L50 and 30.05 is L95. And here you can see, if you were paying attention to what that sum of square value was earlier, that's been reduced. Solver says this is the smallest I can make that value, and I think these are the best estimates of those L50 and L95 parameters. Okay. So that's mathematically how we get this. Now let's say that you wanted to present those results in a scientific publication. To do the presentation, the introductory presentation, I've used a program called SigmaPlot, which is a little bit costly and can be difficult to learn how to use. So we would like to show you how to do this using Excel. So we're going to select the data that we're interested in first, which is the average, the size class average. And next, And next we're going to also collect using control click on the G up here, the predicted proportion of mature females. Okay. Then we're going to ask Excel to build us a plot out of that. I'll zoom in a little bit. We'll click on insert. We're going to go over here to charts. Remember last time we used scatter. This time we want the scatter to be connected with smooth lines. And this is going to be our model plot. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And we can see that that model is very similar to what I showed you earlier on. But again, it's got some axes that are a little bit too long down here. It doesn't have axis labels. We'll put them in. But the other thing we want to do is I'd like to show you what those raw data look like. In other words, we're showing the reader what the observed proportion of mature females were that allowed us to build this model. Okay. So to do that, we're going to right click anywhere on the chart, click on select data. And this says, what do you want to do? Let me zoom in a little bit in case that's difficult to see. We would like to add new data. Excel says, well, what do you want to call that new data? We're going to call that observed. Okay. We're going to click on the X values, which is the exact same thing we did for the model, the average size. The Y values are going to be our actually observed values. I have no idea what this equals 1 means, and it really mucks up the results. So be sure that is deleted before you select that other column. Okay. Let's zoom out now. We'll select the X values. Okay, it wants me to do the Y values first because we're in there. So we're going to use the observed proportion of mature females here. And for the X values, the same thing we did for the model, which is the size class average. Okay. So you can see that superimposes it pretty well. We're happy with that. We click on OK. But I don't like these lines here because we just wanted to show the raw data. So we're going to go up here to the top. We're clicking on a different button than we have in the past now. We want to have format chosen. Go all the way over here to the side. Go down, and we want to edit this series, which is observed. Remember, we named that second data set observed, and we're going to format the selection. When we clicked format selection, new menu popped up here. We're going to click all, and up here at the top, if I zoom in, we're just going to click on the line. That makes that line connecting the dots or the, so now we've got something pretty similar to what I showed you earlier on. We're going to mess with the axes here a little bit now. The same thing I did earlier. We're back here on chart design. We're going to add the chart elements, primary horizontal and primary vertical. The parameter down here was length in centimeters. And what we've got on this axis is the proportion of mature females. Okay, remember, this is females only. All right, the next thing I would like to do is, again, we've got a lot of wasted space here, so we're going to go back and format. I'm going to go up here, show you what I'm choosing. Going to choose the horizontal X values and format that axis by clicking here on axis options. And if we look at this, we again don't have anything below 15. So our axis is going to be between 15 and 30. The other thing we're going to add on here, so you can represent your size at maturity visually, is we would like to have major units every 1 centimeter, and we're going to have minor units at every 0.1 centimeters. And down at the bottom, we're going to choose to have tick marks going out for the minor, but not the major type. So basically, this is pretty much what I showed you earlier on for that plot that I'd done in Sigma plot in the introduction. The last thing that I would like to do to the plot before we add a reference line is go back and modify the vertical axis. That's because this goes between 0 and 1.2. Well, you can't have more than 100% female, so this really doesn't do us any good. We're just going to use more space for plotting here. So we'll modify the vertical axis. Again, click on this little chart button. Axis options, we're going to allow to go between 0 and 1. Okay. And now what this has done is conveniently drawn us that 50% reference line that I showed you a little bit earlier on in the introduction. The last thing we'll do, we're still on format here. Up here in the corner, we're going to click on, we want to add a line. We'll go back here and take our cursor to the intersection of the model line and that 50% reference line. Left click on the mouse, hit shift at the same time and drag down. And what hitting shift does is ensure that we're drawing an absolutely straight vertical line. If you don't hit shift, they can be a little bit off vertical, and it wouldn't be a very good graphical analysis. So hopefully, if we zoom in here, what we see is that this value is very close to 28.3. And it looks like that's pretty good. There's 28, and we're just a little bit past there. So I believe that concludes size at maturity for females. Now, please keep in mind that I haven't done anything yet for size at maturity for males, and I'm going to leave that to you to do that analysis. Okay. One thing that I should have mentioned as I was going through here, and it reminds me when I saw size at maturity values for the males, is that this only goes up to 31.9 centimeters. How do we know there weren't larger females? An easy thing you can do is select all those cells and then select down below them, hit Control D, which means copy everything down. Try that again and see if it actually does it. Oh. Why are you not cooperating today? Okay, let me see if I can do it up here. No. Okay, I'm going to show the example over here. I'm going to enter 16 because it was our smallest size class. What we can do is copy down. Now it's going to cooperate. And basically what Excel is telling me that we don't have an average because there were no individuals in here. So here Excel has counted all of the males in the population, and you can see that there were 0, which means that we've taken the size class up there to a large enough size to account for all of the individuals. Okay. If you had done that copy down function over here, and again, sorry, but I can't tell you why it's not working for me here. Oh, now it is. Basically, Excel didn't like that. But again, we have zeros here. So I'm just going to undo that, say we've gone down far enough. We've accounted for all the females in the population, all the histologically sex and maturity verified females in the population. And this is what the size at maturity looks like for that. Okay, that's all I have for size at maturity. And I think we have questions scheduled now.
Yeah, we have one person raising up her hand. Ibu Rita Rahmawati, silakan Rita. Ibu Rita. Ibu Rita Rahmawati. Okay, so we only have one person, Rita Rahmawati, but apparently, probably she doesn't hear. So I guess we are now entering into bio break then if Ibu Rita doesn't respond in 3, 2, 1. So thank you very much, Pak Ken.
Okay.
Okay,
What are we taking?
Mm-hmm.
What are we taking, Denny? Does everybody get 5 minutes now?
Yeah, the bio break.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll be back in.
Mm-hmm. We'll be back in 10:52.
Okay. I'll see everybody then, and we'll talk about sex ratios.
Yes, great. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu, kita istirahat dulu 5 menit. Terima kasih. Ya, selamat siang Bapak Ibu semuanya. Kita kembali lagi sekarang melanjutkan sesi berikutnya tentang sex ratios, nisbah kelamin. Please Ken, time is yours.
Okay, thank you all for sticking with us. Welcome back from the bio break. This is a topic that I am particularly excited about because I think it has some big implication for fishery modeling. We're going to talk about three types of sex ratios. The first one is overall sex ratios. And here, basically, we're comparing the number of females for every male in the population is how we standardize it. So in our example data set, we had 285 males, 263 females, histologically determined. To get this 1 to 0.92, we divide 285 by 285 to get 1, 263 by 285 to get 0.92. When we go to Excel, we're going to determine whether this sex ratio is significantly different from the expected 1-to-1. And I say expected 1-to-1 because a lot of fishery models assume that you have a constant and equal sex ratio in the population. And if this is not true, it has huge implications for the models, for the model results. Another type of sex ratio we're going to look at is called operational sex ratio. So here we're looking only at the mature individuals. What is the ratio, or how many mature females are there for every mature male? Okay, and again, this is using histologically verified results. Divide 163 by 163 to get 1, 124 by 163 to get 0.76 females for every male. And given the number in our sample size, is this significantly different from 1 to 1 or not. The final thing that I get quite excited about is what we call size-specific sex ratio. And the question here is, does the ratio of males to females change as length changes in your population? And remember I said that we're going to come back and touch on that subject of how bimodal size distributions and how that might affect sex ratios later on. If you remember that plot that I showed you, the length frequency histogram, we had a lot more females in the small size classes and no females in the large size classes. So if we look at this, these data that we got, and these are just observed data, suggest that at smaller sizes, we have a lot more females, that somewhere in the middle, we have a 1-to-1 ratio, and that females become increasingly rare in the larger size classes to the point where they are absent. And this not only has implications in fishery models, but we often talk about a conservation rule of thumb, where it's generally accepted that a large female makes exponentially more eggs than a small female. And somehow this statement has come to be said as large fish make exponentially more eggs than small fish. Well, that's not true for males because it's only females that make the eggs. So if you have a population where the large individuals are exclusively male, that statement can't possibly be true. Okay. So what does this size-specific sex ratio look like? The best model I could find when I went through and used the statistical package that's available to me was this sigmoidal plot. And basically it's suggesting that we start out at a constant level of females and they suddenly drop down to absolutely 0 at the largest lengths. Here, the 50% reference line suggested that somewhere below about 28 centimeters, we've got a higher proportion of females, and anywhere above 28 centimeters, we've got a higher proportion of males, to the point where we're exclusively males or no females here at the largest size classes. Okay, how do we do this in Excel? So we're going to go to the sex ratios tab right here. Click on that. And here you can see that a lot of work has been done for you. In the past, we had to do a little bit of manipulation, and we'll have to do that for the size-specific sex ratios. But for overall sex ratios, everything's already calculated for us. Excel went through and counted all of the males in the population and all the females in the population. And here it said, what would be the expected numbers of males and females if the ratio was 1 to 1? So if we add these two numbers together, divide by 2, put these in here, this is the expectation. Okay. Here is the actual sex ratio, but what we're looking for here is the p-value. This is the chi-squared, this is the chi-square test statistic. So this is what's being done in this cell. If this p-value is greater than 0.05, we say no, there is no significant difference in this sex ratio that we have observed. It's essentially 1 to 1. And here the p-value is higher than 0.05. So we say we've got a 1 to 1. For all intents and purposes, we've got a 1 to 1 sex ratio for all individuals in the population. Okay. What happens here when we go to operational now? Now remember that this was the number of mature females to the number of mature males. So here we've got a slightly different formula. Instead of over here, where Excel was looking at the number of males altogether, whether or not they were mature, over here, Excel for males, and it's doing the same thing for males. And again, we have a ratio of 1 male to 0.76 females, or about 3/4 of a female for every male in this population. Here's the chi-square test statistic. A lot of times the journals are going to like you to report that if you're going to a peer-reviewed journal. But the important point here is that this less than the value of 0.05 individuals, this sex ratio is significantly different from 1:1. And we find that that is pretty common when we look at operational sex ratios versus overall sex ratios. Okay, let me get my head out of the way here, and we're going to now look at size-specific sex ratios. So we have to do the same thing that we did for size at maturity. We have to tell Excel what the minimum size we're looking at is. And if you remember, that was 16 centimeters. So we'll type that in here, and we get all those size classes all the way down for both males and females. Being sure that we had enough, like I showed you earlier, we can select all these cells, hit Control D, and indeed, we don't have any either males, any individuals of either sex in these larger size classes. So we've gone far enough here. So what have we returned? The same thing like we saw in the size at maturity values, where this is the average size of the individuals in that size class. This one counts all individuals, whether they are males or females. Okay, so it's asking for anything. This column, whoops, sorry. This column counts the number of females, and this column counts the number of males. Now, you could change this around and put MAT in here, and it would count the number of mature females, and MAT here instead of that star, and it would count the number of mature males. And here you'd have to put star or question mark MAT to count only mature individuals in here and here, okay? So we're doing basically size or size-specific sex ratios for all individuals in the population. It may be of more interest, given that we did see this significant difference from 1:1 here, to look at only the mature size-specific sex ratios. And basically, you can modify Excel how you need to if you are comfortable doing that. These, like we had for the chi-square analysis, were just the number of expected males and females if we had an equal sex ratio. So 26.8 divided by 2 is 17. We expect 17 in each case. This is the frequency of males, or the proportion of males. It's simply the male number divided by the total. This is the frequency of the females. It's simply the female number divided by the total number. And what we can see here is, like I showed you on that introductory presentation in PowerPoint, that the proportion of females starts out high and gets progressively smaller to the point where we don't have any females. And we see this pattern quite frequently, not always, mind you, but quite frequently in the reef fish that we analyze. When I say not always, sometimes we can't identify any sort of a pattern. Sometimes it seems just the opposite, where females are the larger individuals. Okay, so there's no hard and fast rule of thumb here, but it is something that everybody should be aware of, especially given the importance of that assumption in fishery models that we have a 1:1 sex ratio, or that conservation rule of thumb that big fish make more eggs. Here that can't be true because none of those big fish are females. Okay, so the chi-square p-value, we don't have the chi-square value, but we're looking, if the p-value is less than 0.05, we say, yes, it's significantly different. So these 4 p-values are different, lower than 0.05. So all of these values are significantly different from 1:1. We had a higher proportion of females in these smaller size classes. Okay, we have 3 cases where the p-value is higher than 0.05. So in these 3 middle size classes, these sex ratios we cannot, or proportions cannot be statistically determined to be different from 1:1. And in 3 cases here, again, the p-value is 0 or less than 0.05. So in these 3 size classes, this proportion is less than a 1:1 sex ratio. Here is higher, but that's basically an artifact of our low size. One individual, that male, okay, that we've got no large individuals that are females. Okay. So how do we plot this? Unfortunately, I can't make Excel give you the exact same plot that I showed you in that introduction, but I'll show you something that'll get close and at least help you to identify those trend lines. Okay, so what we would like to start out doing is selecting the size class average. And then we're going to look at the frequency, size class average. I'm going to hold down control when I do this. And this is similar to what I did. We're going to look at the frequency of the females. I'm going to go up here to insert. Click on insert, and we're going to choose the scatter plots. Okay, this is the one without the lines making a smooth connection now. We can drag this out of the way. I'm just left clicking and dragging. I'll unintentionally drag that down. We're going to add our axes. And I showed you this before. We want to be sure we're on chart design and then add chart elements. We're going to add horizontal and vertical. And these are the same sort of exercises that we've gone through before, just adding axes and axes titles. So down here on the bottom, we have length in centimeters. On the y-axis, we're going to change this to the proportion. Oops. Of mature females. Then we're wasting a lot of space here. I'll get rid of this title on the top, and we'll change the axis. We want to format horizontal axis values. And our little menu didn't pop up, so we have to be sure if that doesn't pop up that we click here on format selection, and that'll make the menu pop up. And our minimum size again was somewhere around nothing lower than 15 centimeters. Okay, so now we've taken up the majority of this plot. All we want to do now is add a trend line. And if you can remember how we did that, we click on the plus here, add a chart element, go down to trend line. I can zoom in a little bit. Excel's trying to automatically make us add a linear trend line, but we want to do something else. We're going to choose more options. And unfortunately, the closest thing I could find is polynomial. And here we're going to choose polynomial and let the order at 2. And you can see here, it's not exactly what I showed you at the beginning, but it is pretty representative of what these data are doing. Now, when I did statistical analysis before, I got a slightly higher R-square value for that sigmoidal regression analysis that I showed you at the beginning. That suggests that that model explains these data a little bit better than the polynomial one. This one came in about 0.006 lower, but they were both up in the 95, 96% R-square value range. So both of them explain it pretty well. One thing we want to do here is get rid of this trend line below 0. We can't have fewer than 0% or a proportion of 0 of females. So let's change the y-axis values. And we're going to make this go between 0 and 1. Again, we want it to go all the way up to 1. Let's reset. And here we can see on, whoops, that didn't go to 1. There we go. It went. And now we have this this line here with 50% or 0.5 proportion for line in. Okay. Above or to the left of this intersection of the trend line with the 50% value, we've got a higher percentage of females or a higher proportion of females. And as we get larger and larger and larger, the proportion of females drops out of the population until it's 0. Okay. And I believe that summarizes everything that I wanted to tell you about sex ratios. So we can take any questions now if there are some.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Ken. Now we have Ibu Insariani. Please, Ibu Insariani. Question. Ibu Insariani. Okay. Well, yeah, no, she's not asking the question. So now I think you can continue, Ken, to fecundity.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Ken, can I add one comment?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so, you know, one thing to consider too is for species that will change sexes, you may also see these size-specific sex ratios shifting. And what Ken's talking about, which is a bit more unique, is this idea that we're actually seeing for fishes that don't change sexes, we're seeing these shifts in size-specific sex ratios. And at least from a fisheries perspective, this is fairly critical because often it's just assumed that those sex ratios are going to be 1-to-1 when they're incorporated into assessment models. And so the data that we're finding for at least a lot of the reef fish species we're dealing with is that for these non-sex changing species, they actually have these differential sex ratios based on size. Those can then influence the assessment results, which influence some of the recommendations that may be made for the management of those species. Thanks.
That's a very good point, Eric. Thank you for mentioning that. And I should have brought out that we oftentimes see these patterns in what we call gonochoristic or non-sex changing species. And exactly like Eric said, the implications of that can be huge. So thanks, Eric.
Ken, sorry, I think one person. Ibu Husna, ada pertanyaan, Bu? Ibu Husna?
No, thanks.
Okay.
Enough?
Okay, great. I'll mute it. Okay, Ken, it's all yours.
Okay, now we would like to talk about the length-fecundity relationship. And when we're talking about fecundity, we're talking about the number of eggs produced by a female. And in particular, what we're talking about here is batch fecundity. That is the number of eggs that female will be releasing the next time she spawns. Okay, and we do that by only counting the largest oocytes in the ovaries of females that have stage 4 oocytes present. And I want to point out right now that there's an error in the standard operating procedure on page 12. We accidentally said that we count all ovaries with oocytes in stage 3B or above. Other places in the SOP, we say stage 4. When I spoke to you the first day and gave an overview of specimen processing, we said we count only stage 4. So stage 4 is what it is. We apologize for this error in the SOP and hope it won't cause any confusion for you. So remember, we're only looking at ovaries that have stage 4 oocytes in them. The other thing that I'd like to do right now is point out some differences in the spreadsheets that I said are available to you. Up until now, I've been using the spreadsheet SOP data template. And this is because it makes it very easy for us to take some data that have already been entered in another paste. If anybody remembers this or not, but on the first day when I gave the overview, I said, hey, we've got this awesome spreadsheet that automatically calculates fecundity for you if you put in the correct information. Okay. That would mean that we would expect to see some formulas or formulae in these cells, both the mean and fecundity cells. And if you look up here in the formula bar, there's nothing at all. In other words, this spreadsheet does not automatically calculate fecundity for you. Okay. So where can you find it? A spreadsheet that does. That's in this spreadsheet called SOP blank data sheet. And I used this as an example earlier on when I showed you how to do sex-specific weight-length relationships. So there's already some data in there. But I want to show you what's happened, because you can enter just in bits and pieces or only do some analyses if that's what you're interested in. So in this case, I only put length and weight data in there, and we can do one of those analyses. So if we're interested in calculating what fecundity is, if you remember, we need several values. One was the whole gonad weight of a fish, either a female or male. One was the sample gonad weight, or the weight of that 1 centimeter thin cross section that you took through the middle of a testis, or the middle, on the middle of an ovary. We wouldn't do the fecundity analysis on a testis. I apologize. We diluted today counts were per that diluted sample. So let's here and show you what happens. Let's say our whole gonad weight was about 145. And I'm just making something up right now. Our sample gonad weights, we've found that when we take that 1 centimeter cross section through what we think is a mature ovary, it tends to come in somewhere around 1 gram. Okay? So I'm going to say we took a pretty good cross section, came up with a sample of 1.105, the weight of that was. Okay? So all's well and good so far. I think if you remember at the beginning, I said we found that a dilution volume after the eggs or the ovaries have been digested of about 400 milliliters works well for us. So the next thing we want to do is put in our egg counts. And we found that if we have that 1 gram cross section and we use about 400 milliliter dilution volume, that our egg counts tend to come in somewhere around 50 of the largest sizes as we do these egg counts in 1 milliliter aliquots. Okay, so what we've said here so far is that, and it's taken the mean, we've only got one observation so far. So we've got 50 eggs in that 1 milliliter aliquot times a dilution volume of 400 milliliters would suggest that there are 20,000 eggs in that whole volume of liquid or in that dilution. Okay, what that means was that we had 20,000 eggs in that 1.1 gram subsample of the ovary. Okay. What's happened now is we have to figure out how much was in that whole ovary, and we just figure out the relationship of that approximately 1 gram sample to the whole gonad weight. New egg count, and we found that an egg count of around 10 1 milliliter aliquots tends to kind of equilibrate towards some sort of a median or mean fecundity estimate that doesn't vary too much. So I'm going to put 49, I'm going to put 51, and you can see that these values are changing, but hopefully they're kind of hovering around the same place and not swinging wildly all over the place. And if we see that, we're pretty confident that we're getting some pretty good fecundity estimates. 45, 48, 55, 54, and 46, just for good measure. So the mean number of eggs in that aliquot was in that dilution was 50.2, and this tells us that based on the sample gonad weight and the whole gonad weight, our fecundity estimate for that individual that had stage 4 oocytes, when we only counted the largest size class of eggs in that ovary, was about 347,901 eggs, or 902 eggs. Okay. So if you're ever in the market to calculate fecundity estimates, come to this spreadsheet and you can enter your data in here, and we'll have that calculation will automatically be done for you. Okay, let's go back to our fecundity tab now. Just showing you, I'm just going to click on fecundity down here. And what we can see is that several of our columns have been auto-populated for us. Okay. One is fecundity, and what Excel has done was gone back and looked at the data sheet and pulled out all non-zero fecundity cells in the fecundity column and entered them here in increasing order. Okay. So it's ranked them. log of fecundity has simply taken log to the base 10 of this fecundity estimate, and log of length has looked back at the original data sheet and said, okay, I've pulled a fecundity estimate out of there. What was the length associated with that fecundity estimate? And when I know that length, I want the log to the base 10 of that. Okay. Now, if this reminds you of anything, it probably reminds you of the length-weight relationship that we did here. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation and show you the raw data that we got when we plotted those fecundity estimates versus length. Okay. And this looks kind of like that length-weight relationship. It's got a little bit more slop in it, and that's what we've found with these fecundity length relationships. They're a little bit sloppier than we had for the length-weight relationships. They can kind of be all over the place. The model is just like we had for a length relationship. Here, fecundity B means batch fecundity equals some parameter A times length raised to some power or exponent. And we can find that just like we did for the length-weight relationship. We're going to log transform the data so that we can come up with a equation for this line. And we're going to use the intercept here and take the inverse log of that to come up with the A value, just like we did for the weight-length relationship. And the slope of this line equals B in the fecundity length relationship, just like that B was the B value for the weight-length relationship. So we're basically doing the same thing that we did for weight-length relationship, and we'll go through that quickly right now. So if you remember what we did, we simply did regression analysis. We want to be sure that we're clicking on the data tab up here at the top. That's going to give us access to the data analysis add-in. We'll click on that, and it's going to ask us what we want to do. We would like to do regression, just like we did for the weight-length relationship. And it's going to come up with the exact same menu that we had for the weight-length relationship. In fact, it's going to remember what we did in the weight-length relationship. There we had 600 observations of weight and length. We don't have 600 observations of fecundity, so we need to get rid of these. And we'll get rid of this too, because we're likely not going to plot it at the same point. Okay. Instead, what we want to put is the information that we gathered on the fecundity page right here. So to input the Y range, if you remember, the Y values were log of fecundity. We'll select all the way down to the bottom. We don't want to select these. These are just telling us that we dragged it down far enough that we got all of the fecundity values. So I had this go down a little bit further than we needed to be sure that we caught all of the fecundity estimates. We're going to go back and select all of the log length information. And we're going to have our output appear on this page for us. And here we're choosing F1, where we have some placeholders. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. Let me undo that. I still had the residuals showing up. Sorry, I have to make some corrections here. I made a little bit of a mistake. These are the coefficients that we got. So it did the regression the way we would like to. I'm gonna have to do something on the fly here. What I'd like you to see is that our adjusted R square is not as high as we saw for the weight length relationship. This model explains a lot less of the variation in the data than the weight length relationship did for the weight and length data. But we still have a significant relationship. It's still a non-random relationship between length and batch fecundity because this value is less than 0.05. Okay. So we know already that B is equal to B from this model, or which is the slope up here. So we're going to say that this equals this. Okay. So these two values are equivalent. And then our intercept is we have to back transform this. So this is going to equal 10 raised to the power of this value. And this is the A parameter for our length fecundity relationship. Let me get rid of these so that I can show you how to plot this information then. Basically, we're going to have to do something else here. We're going to have to insert another column because we need to know our length information, only the lengths that are associated with fecundities. And we're going to take advantage of the fact that Excel went down through and found only the fecundity values for us. We're going to insert, I'm going to right click on that column heading. I'm going to choose insert, and that's going to insert a blank column for us. Okay. We're going to call this length. And then we're going to back transform the log of our length values here, just like we back transformed the log of the intercept down here. Okay. So this is only going to give us the length, raw length information. These two columns, we're going to insert a new chart, and it's going to be the scatter plot, which we've done multiple times now. So hopefully this is looking somewhat familiar to you. Let me drag this down out of the way so it's not blocking any of the information we have at hand. We're going to do the same task of adding access titles to make this look acceptable for peer-reviewed publication. Change the access titles to length in centimeters. And this access title is going to be batch fecundity. And our unit is number of eggs. Okay, same thing. We've got a lot of wasted space. Here it looks like our smallest individual is somewhere around 22 centimeters. So I'm going to change this axis title. I'm sorry, the axis range. We're going to format a horizontal axis value. Click here on the chart, click on axis options, and change this to 22. Okay. I'm going to get rid of this because it's wasted space. We want to maximize what it is. Chart. And then we would like to, just like we did for the weight length relationship, is add the trend. And just like we did weight length relationship, we're going to choose power. And that describes our data and the model or what that is. 8.53 is our estimate of the length batch fecundity relationship for this data set. Okay, so I think we can take questions now, Annie.
Yeah. We don't have anyone raising their hand.
Okay, there's a couple of questions here in the chat. Ken, one person asked if you could show them the formula in G22 because they got a different answer.
Absolutely. In G22. Let me just zoom in. Sorry about that. And that was my error. I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm not showing the monitor, am I? Okay. I apologize that I basically overwrote data because I forgot to uncheck the residual values. So I erased the automatic calculation there. So let me zoom in up here. It's equals 10 and caret H17. Here's the same thing duplicated down below. Equals 10 caret. Thanks for that, Ross.
And we have another question in writing from PNA? No. Okay, I think the person Abdullah Habibi was asking, responding to the previous question.
Oh, sorry, this is for the length-weight relationship. The B value for isometric growth, I think, is 3.
He said the intercept,
anything less would be negatively allometric. Anything positive would be positively allometric. And I think a B value of 3 is what we define as isometric.
Okay, so I guess that's the answer to PNA. What about Abdullah Habibi, Ken?
I think that's what we just answered.
Okay, great. So I think we can continue to spawning periodicity if asking questions.
Okay, very good. So spawning periodicity, we're trying to figure out when the period of maximum or perhaps minimum spawning is occurring in the population. There's a number of ways that you can measure spawning periodicity. One of the ways that you could do it is to plot the proportion of different egg stages for females. And when you're seeing the proportion of stage 4 oocytes in ovaries increase, you could assume that that would be the peak in spawning periodicity. Unfortunately, that's probably only going to work for the females, though, because once we see sperm show up in the males, we tend to see sperm show up pretty much all the time. Okay, we assume that once they're mature, that sperm are always going to be there. So we're not going to see the same sort of pattern in different types of sperm for males. So the approach we take is one that's going to work for both sexes, and that is we use a gonosomatic index, and we're going to compare gonosomatic index values over time. The example that I'm going to give you today is by month. Okay? And I'd like to point out right now that there's a lot of different comparisons you can do. There's a lot of different values or units you could use here for time. Say in Indonesia, your part of the world, you have a wet and a dry season. You might want to break it down to wet and dry season. Okay. I spend part of my time in the northern part of the United States. We have 4 seasons. If the fish we're dealing with here, we might want to compare gonosomatic index in summer, fall, winter, and spring and see if they differ by season, by those sorts of seasons. If you have a multi-year study, you might want to compare different years to see if spawning was better in one year. Do is we often find that spawning, take the data information that's on your raw data sheet, convert the date to moon phase, and then group the data by moon phase to see whether spawning is increasing on the new moon and full moon, or perhaps decreasing on the new moon and full moon, or if it varies in any way according to moon phase. So please just keep in mind that right now, we're giving you one example with month, but there are many different ways that you can group your data to do some very interesting comparisons of spawning periodicity. So I said we use a gonosomatic index. The other thing that I should say is that you can see in the literature, there are many different types of gonosomatic indices, okay? We use one, which is the gonad weight, which refers back here to gonado, okay? They're asking what the gonad weight is. And then this part somatic means non-gonadal body weight. So we take the whole body weight minus the gonad weight, and we think that this is a closer definition of what should be meant by gonosomatic index, whereas we're only taking the body weight that is not part of the reproductive system. You will oftentimes, and we multiply that whole thing by 100, sorry. You will oftentimes see that people take gonad weight divided by body weight. In that case, I would argue that you're not dealing with gonadosomatic index, okay? Because you're including the gonad weight in this thing that you're calling the somatic weight. Sometimes we'll see that people will actually remove the gut and the gonad from the fish, because they worry that if the fish has eaten has a belly full of food, or perhaps has eaten a particularly large prey item, it could influence your estimate of whole body weight. We don't do that pretty much because as we're going through processing specimens, we're getting automatically the body weight and the gonad weight. So these things are relatively easy to obtain, and we believe. You can see that the values are kind of all over the place. Maybe there's a peak here, but it depends on how many are down below here, because you could have a lot of zeros down here, and maybe there's not truly, on average, a peak in that month of July. So what I'll do now is plot the mean value and connect them together, and you can see that the mean value of the gonadosomatic index on any given month does indeed seem to peak in month 7 or July. I'm going to present that a different way because this is kind of a sloppy or scattered presentation. What I'm going to do instead is plot the average value, which are the round dots here, and then the standard deviation of those values for each month. And here you can see, just like I said earlier, there was quite a bit of variation for July, but still we have the highest mean value in the month of July, whereas it looks like in the month of September, that value was the lowest and we had the lowest value variation. So let's go to Excel and find out what we need to do to estimate GSI by month in this example. So I'm going to go to corresponding periodicity tab. And what you're going to see here is that Excel has gone down through and returned a GSI value according to that equation that I gave you during the initial presentation, or just during this recent presentation. If we had the weight and the gonad weight, it can calculate a GSI. If we don't have both of those values, it can't calculate a GSI. So probably what happened is maybe as we were removing the gonad, we tore it in half and weren't convinced that we got a very accurate weight estimate of the whole gonad. So we didn't put anything there. So Excel's not going to calculate a GSI value for you. The next thing we do is just a bit of record keeping to make these other equations work. Excel is going down through and said, okay, was this GSI value calculated for a female? And if so, it returns a yes. And here it's returning the values for any female, whether they were mature or immature. And here it's returning a yes if that individual was a male, either mature or immature. So what's going on next is that we have the months listed by their number from January to December. And like I said before, we only had GSI values for the month of May through September, are the only thing that's filled out here. We've returned these values right here because it's saying, hey, we don't have anything present, okay, so we can't do the math that you want us to do. What this is doing now is returning the mean GSI value for all females that were equal to or greater than female size at maturity. And this is important. We're only including those females that have reached adult size because we wouldn't expect the smaller ones to be spawning yet, okay, because they're not mature. Okay. So the important thing about this is that this formula refers back to the size at maturity worksheet, and it's taking this value K1, and I'll show you what that is in just a little bit, and says, hey, if this individual that we're looking at is not greater than this value K1 on the size at maturity sheet, we're not going to count it. If it is greater than the value K1, we are going to include it in this calculation on female size at maturity, and that is the female L50. Okay, so our periodicity calculations are only including the individuals that are equal to or greater than female size at maturity. So here it's taken the mean of those values, and here is the standard deviation of those values. What I want to point out now is you have to be very careful on this worksheet, because once you enter data in the data sheet, you're going to have some numbers show up here if Excel can calculate a GSI value. Here, if you remember correctly, we did not do male size at maturity. If we go back and look at the male size at maturity chart, L50 is blank. It's still referring back there and saying, well, size at maturity must be 0, so I'm going to count all of them, okay? Until you solved for male size at maturity, you don't have legitimate results for the periodicity values, the mean GSI and the standard deviation of the GSI, okay? This one we've solved for female size at maturity, so we do have valid answers. This one, we do not have valid answers. So please be very, very, very careful before accepting these to be sure that the size at maturity values have been calculated first. Okay. So what we like to do now is plot the size of, the GSI values. We're going to simply select all the data in the month and female GSI mean columns that have real numbers in them. That is all the values from the months 5 through 9 and the corresponding mean GSI values. We're going to hit insert, and we're going to insert the same scatter plot out of the way of our data. We're going to do the same sorts of manipulations we've done before, make the chart a little bit bigger. We're going to add some axis titles. Now we have month in this case, or it could be year, or it could be season, or it could be moon phase. And here we have GSI. And if you remember the formula for GSI, that was a weight divided by a weight. So this is a unitless index. So all you have to put is GSI. Let's spread this out a little bit so we are using up more of the available space. We're going to go to Format. We would like to format the horizontal axis. And then we'll click on the Chart button, Axis Options, and we don't have anything below 4. So we'll change this to 4. Now we've spread this out quite nicely. The next thing we want to do is add error bars like we showed you on that original presentation. We'll add chart elements. We'll add error bars. We'll click on standard deviation is what we'd like to add. And then Excel just does something in my mind that's completely wacky, because it throws some bars up there that have nothing to do with what we've just calculated. These horizontal bars we're going to get rid of. Just click on any one of the horizontal bars and click delete. The next thing we want to do is modify or format that plot. Again, we're going up here to format. We're going to go all the way over here and check on our Series Y error bars. And we tell Excel we would like to format the selection. And a new menu is going to pop up over here. We're happy having those error bars go both ways, which is what this is allowing us to do. It says both. And we want to go down and use some custom values for our error bars. And we're going to click on this and specify the values. And again, this throws up this =1 thing that I have no idea what it means or what it does. So we're going to delete it. And we're going to select the standard deviation values that were in the results. And it turns out that we're going to select them twice. So the negative error value was these, and the positive error value was the exact same set of cells. Okay. Click OK. Go down here, and we have a plot that looks very much like the one that I showed you for that PowerPoint presentation. And I believe that's all that we have to say about spawning periodicity, except for please, please, please make a note to yourself. Don't accept these values until you're sure that size at maturity has been calculated at the size at maturity worksheet. And I believe we can take any questions now. If there is, then I would imagine that this sort of thing should work. It might be that instead you would use the weight of the sea cucumber versus the length of the sea cucumber. If there's not a standard way of measuring the length of a sea cucumber, and then your weight length relationship would probably be a slightly different, because the sea cucumber is growing in all dimensions, and the oh wait, I'm sorry. I guess my concern would be fecundity estimates. You might end up a little bit differently if there's no truly standardized way of measuring the length of a sea cucumber. So other things should work for invertebrates as long as you can determine that they are truly male or female or mature or immature. Oh, I see the bottom. Yeah, inconsistent length. Okay. So one of the ways that you could do is it might be that do sea cucumbers kind of tend to dry out to a standard length? It might be a way that you could do it, and I don't know the answer to that. Again, the other thing might be that you just use sea cucumber weight, and then the relationship between weight and fecundity at least would be somewhat different, because it would probably be a linear relationship, because both of those are kind of expecting to be changing in kind of a cubic function.
Okay, we have one person raising the hand. Pak Denny. Pak Denny, silakan bertanya, Pak. Pak Denny Suhernawan.
Okay, thank you, Ibu. Yep, Denny from Udayana University. I would like to ask Mr. Ken. Mr. Ken, when I saw the figure connecting month and GSI, the figure shows the high standard deviation. It means there is a variation among months, the standard deviation. In a given month is very short, another month a little bit wide. So what is the implication? What is the meaning of such difference? And then maybe can we improve, or can we similarize the standard deviation by the increase of sample number? So what is the number of the minimum sample? Thank you.
I don't know what the number of the minimum sample is, and I don't know if the standard error would ever get smaller, because when you are dealing with fish, you're oftentimes dealing with individuals that are doing different things at the same time. So it's not that unusual that we would expect to see a high standard deviation in a month when spawning is also looks like it's got a high mean value or a high GSI value. Eric or Ross, do you all have any input or impressions?
Sorry, I was doing. Can you restate the question?
He says that he's noticed that on a seasonality plot that we have a month with high average GSI value, and that also has a high standard deviation associated with it. And he says, is there anything that we could do to decrease that standard deviation? And particularly, is there any sort of minimum size that or sample size that we should have to be confident that we've got a pretty good estimate of what spawning looks like for that month?
Yeah, I don't know. I just, I concur with what you're saying, that there is so much variability within a small population. One fish could be going off spawning, huge amounts, and the other female is not doing anything. So that might be, accounting for that variation.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree.
Oh, go ahead,
Ken. I was going to say, I'd agree with both of you. The one thing you might consider is, a typical way statistically to try and handle variance is to stratify your samples. So perhaps there's a size threshold that you can use to calculate your GSIs, above which that size you're only including in the sample. That may be a way to handle some of the variability that you're seeing.
Yeah, and I was going to say something along those lines, is that if you remember that the calculation that's being done here is only for individuals that have reached size at maturity. But if you remember back to the size at maturity curve, we would expect that even at size at maturity, there's going to be some individuals that are not yet spawning because they haven't reached maturity. So it might be that you want to go to, I don't know, even like the L95 value, you could change the formula that we've used here and said, we only want to consider individuals that have reached L95. In other words, this is the length that comprising 95% mature individuals. So you wouldn't have a lot of immature ones in there, potentially increasing your variability.
Yep.
Again, the important thing I think to do is to, as you do this, be sure that you explain in your methods what approach it is that you took so that your readers understood exactly what they're looking at.
Okay,
there's
thank you.
another.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay, any information?
Sorry, there's another comment.
Gimana Pak Denny?
Mungkin ada jawaban tadi yang mau ditambahkan oleh Bapak satunya lagi. Iya, mungkin.
Is there any other response from Ken or Eric? That's what he was asking.
I think that's about as far as I can take the question. And thank you for the question.
Oke.
Oke. Iya. Terima kasih, Ibu. Nggih, terima kasih, Ibu.
Berikutnya Ibu Ina MSP, silahkan Bu. Ibu Ina. Ibu Ina MSP. Ya. Silakan.
No, no, I just want to say thank you for the information, but maybe I just request maybe someday I can ask a question, because until now I still confused about the gonad actually to make a differentiation, because this is my first training, and all of the training like can already explain already explain. I'm still confusing. Perhaps I just can slowly thinking about that. Perhaps someday I have real question, because I'm still thinking about all of this. Thank you. Maybe that.
Yeah, we'd be very happy to hear from people, and we do receive questions via email after these sessions are over, and we'll address them as we can. In terms of learning the gonad stages, I would encourage you to read through the standard operating procedure, and you can almost think of it as an atlas or a picture book of gonads. It will help you to identify them. And again, we intended the exam to be a learning experience where, as you go through, take it multiple times. We had one individual say that he's passed and has still kept taking the exam because he enjoyed learning about the different gonad types. So take those until you are comfortable with identifying the gonad stages, and then once you are and you have your questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at any time in the future. We'd be happy to address your question.
Okay, thank you, Ken, because I work with groupers and but not directly related with gonad, but I already saved the gonad, and until now I'm still confused. But thanks for the information from your information. It's add a little information for me, and I hope someday I can make a progress for that. Thank you very much.
We hope so too. Thank you.
Yes.
Can I add to that question? Also, the SOP that Ken mentioned, we will have a version in Bahasa Indonesia uploaded online very soon, and so hopefully that resource can also be helpful for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And also just to add, Ibu Ina, nanti semua training ini 4 sesi kan direkam ya, nanti akan ditaruh di akun YouTube. Akan kami beritahu pada hari terakhir tanggal 4 Februari di akun YouTube mana. Tapi nanti kita akan upload di akun YouTube dan akan kita kasih informasinya juga melalui email.
Ya, terima kasih banyak Bu Eni.
Ya, sama-sama. There is a question in Q&A, Ken.
Yes, if we'd be happy to participate if there's an opportunity to do that. That would be great. Another question is about the spreadsheet and 10 egg samples. Is it the ideal number? This is a trade-off between how much time it takes to count the eggs. And it sounds very simple to me, for me to say that we take this 1 milliliter aliquot of eggs and count the largest size. In reality, this takes an incredibly long period of time. So we found that 10 eggs tends to be the size at which that fecundity estimate starts kind of leveling out and not bouncing around a little bit as you add more and more estimates. One thing you could do if this 10 egg sample concerns you is to just increase the number of egg sample sizes and calculate fecundity that way. Honestly, it's one of those things that as you're going through, when we're doing these projects, oftentimes we have a limited amount of time. We call this kind of a rapid reproductive analysis technique, and there's only enough time to count 10 egg samples in all of the individuals that we've collected. So some of it is just a limitation of time. But I certainly wouldn't I wouldn't hesitate to count more if you saw that your fecundity estimate was bouncing around quite a bit as you added more and more samples. So we kind of wait for that to equilibrate.
Okay, great. So are you going now to explain about the take-home exam, Ken, or?
I can do that. I wanted to point out to people that there will be an exam 2 coming along, that it is not ready for publication yet for 2 reasons. We had some technical difficulties when designing the exam today. La Lima, the site that we used to host this, was down for several hours this morning. And we wanted to be sure that we had Indonesian translations for both all the questions and all the answers that were possible. So it's going to be a format much like the last one, only this time you're going to be working with the data sets that we're going to provide to you. So basically doing the sorts of analyses that I've shown you how to do in Excel, and you will have the YouTube videos to refer back to if you're having trouble. So A, this is not ready, but B, Eric is going to come back next time and talk about doing all of these analyses in R. I don't think he's going to be giving you the lengthy introductions to each of these topics. He's going to assume that that they've been done already. So I believe the next statistical presentation is going to be a little bit faster than this one. Anyway, we want to be sure that you've been exposed to R before doing this exam as well. Now, for almost all of the questions, you can answer the question by doing an analysis in Excel or doing the analysis in R. So it's whichever one you are most comfortable with. But we like to be sure that you have that exposure to R first. And there are a couple of questions that are more operational questions about Excel or about R, and you will need to have been exposed to the R lecture in order to answer those questions correctly. So look for the exam to be available the next time we come back, and I will tell you more about the exam at that point in time.
Okay, great. Any other comment or insight from Eric and Ross before we call it a day? No? Okay, great. Thank you Pak Ken, thank you Pak Eric, thank you Pak Ross, and terima kasih Bapak Ibu semua di seluruh Indonesia maupun di luar negeri yang sudah mengikuti acara ini sampai jam 12.03. Terima kasih, kita akan berjumpa kembali pada hari Kamis, tanggal 4 Februari di jam yang sama, jam 9 pagi waktu Indonesia bagian Barat. Saya Eni Buhari, pamit undur diri. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.